North Korea test-fired a missile into the Sea of Japan earlier this month, sparking widespread fear in the international community. US lawmakers want to put the country on the terrorism blacklist. China too has responded by suspending all coal imports from the country. But why is North Korea hated by so many? Our story begins in Japan. For over 200 years, Japan was ruled by the Tokugawa shogunate, or the feudal military government. After the Industrial Revolution, European nations began colonizing countries in Asia under the political ideology of imperialism. Japan was forced to open its ports to the Western world in 1854 and sign numerous one-sided treaties. The people were humiliated by this. The shogunate were overthrown in 1867, giving rise to imperial rule in Japan under Emperor Meiji. Meiji transformed Japan from a feudal state to a capitalist and imperial superpower. The restoration led to enormous changes in Japan's political and social structure, and was even responsible for their emergence as a modernized nation. Korea at the time was going through a period of political instability, and before European powers could capitalize on this, Japan developed a plan to move in. In 1875, they sent war boats under the command of Inoue Yoshika to Korean shores. Korea soon gave in to the pressure and signed a treaty that opened 3 trading routes with Japan. The Japanese had done the exact same thing to Korea as the West had done to them. Japanese merchants soon moved into the country and transformed it into a center of foreign trade and commerce. Many in Korea were not comfortable with this and resorted to attacks on Japanese businessmen and diplomats. As a result, the Meiji government received permission to place armed guards in the city under the name of protection. With armed guards in place, all they needed now was an excuse that would warrant military intervention, and the Korean annexation would be complete. In 1894, they got their chance. Unhappy peasants staged an armed rebellion against the rulers of Korea. The rulers were so scared, they called on the Chinese for help. The Chinese sent their troops to crush the rebellion. Japan, angered that the Chinese did not inform them before sending their troops, started the First Sino-Japanese War. Japan won the war, and now had almost complete control over Korea. One obstacle remained in their path. Empress Myeonsong, known informally as Queen Min, had always taken harsh stands against the Japanese. She was queen consort, wife of the emperor, and after the Sino-Japanese War worked towards building stronger ties with Russia in an attempt to block Japanese influence. To tackle the problem, General Miura Goro of Japan orchestrated a plot to assassinate the queen. In a crude and brutal move, Japanese assassins infiltrated the queen's chambers in October 1895. They assassinated the queen and burnt her body in a pine forest far away to hide all evidence of the deed. She was 43. During the next 10 years, Japan established military and economic dominance over Korea and ultimately annexed the nation in 1910. However, Japanese rule was short-lived. Towards the end of the Second World War, the United States bombed the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and Russia invaded the Korean peninsula. Japan surrendered to the Allied forces in 1945, ending 35 years of Japanese occupation of Korea, and leading to a new political dynamic that has shaped Korea as we know it today. The United States were wary of Korea falling completely into the hands of the Soviets, and hence, working on a very short notice, appointed 2 young officers, who then used a National Geographic map as the basis of deciding the border. The 30th parallel was chosen, as it divided the country approximately in half, and even placed the capital Seoul under American occupation. To their surprise, the Soviets accepted the division. It was decided that Korea would remain under their trusteeship for a period of 5 years until 1950, and gradually be ushered into independence. A Soviet-US Joint Commission met the following year and tried to work towards a unified Korea, but failed to make any progress as a state of geopolitical tension ensued between the two nations. The difference in their ideology deepened the division, and the Commission couldn't succeed in its objective. The US brought the issue to the UN, who passed a resolution in 1947 declaring that free elections should be held, foreign troops should be withdrawn, and a UN Commission for Korea should be set up. The Soviets boycotted the voting. They held veto power, and in the absence of their support, UN-supervised elections were held in the South only. On August 15, 1948, the Republic of Korea formally came into existence, with Syngman Rhee being elected its first president. In the north, a communist regime under Kim Il-sung came to power, and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea was proclaimed the same year. The Americans and the Soviets withdrew from Korea, handing power to their respective governments. Many Koreans saw this as a prelude to a permanent division of the country. Two separate nations with diametrically opposed political, economic, and social systems emerged. Both governments claimed to be the legitimate government of all of Korea, and neither side accepted the border to be permanent. After being part of the same nation for more than a millennium, the split was unacceptable to both sides. In 1950, the Soviets allegedly gave Kim Il-sung the go-ahead to invade the South in order to unite the nation. They calculated that the Americans would not intervene. Mao Zedong, who received North Korean support during the Chinese Civil War, also agreed to send reinforcements if needed. With Stalin and Mao's assurances, North Korean troops crossed over the 30th parallel in June the same year. Within 2 months, South Korea were on the verge of defeat, being pushed all the way back to the Busan perimeter. The UN recognized this as an act of invasion and launched a counter-offensive at Incheon in September, cutting off numerous North Korean troops. Those who managed to escape retreated north all the way to the Chinese border. The Chinese forces entered the war, and this time the UN forces were forced to retreat. Territory changed hands many times and finally stabilized around the 30th parallel. An armistice was signed in 1953, and the Korean Demilitarized Zone was created, separating the two nations. It is ironically one of the most heavily militarized regions in the world today. An estimated 2.5 million civilians were either killed or wounded during the Korean War. No peace treaty was signed, and technically the two Koreas are still at war. Periodic clashes, many of which are deadly, continue to this day. Kim Il-sung's grandson, Kim Jong-un, is the current supreme leader of North Korea and is aggressively expanding their nuclear program, conducting numerous missile tests and sparking widespread fear in the international community. Numerous sanctions have been placed on the nation by the United States and others, and with the recent impeachment of South Korean President Park Geun-hye, it will be interesting to see how things go forward.